Pastor with No Answers theme song that you hear pretty much every week when I say, and this is the Pastor with No Answers, was actually composed by Dan Koch. And you can actually hire Dan Koch to compose music for your business or for a commercial. Go to dankoch.net. That's DANKOCH.net. And then I also wanted to bring some attention to the theme music of this new series that we are calling Why Do You Still Believe? And that is brought to you by none other than Lowercase Noises, which can be tracked down at lowercasenoises.com. A guy named Andy Othling. Very awesome stuff. Hope you enjoy this episode. On this newest segment of Why Do You Still Believe, we have Zach Bolen. A lot of y'all know him as the musician of Citizens and Saints. We're going to peer into his background a bit and talk about why he still believes. So he's 32 years old, became a Christian, he says, as a 14-year-old. His parents were both Christians, and then obviously, as any child's life would be unbelievably disrupted, his was too when his dad passed away at the age of 6. When he prays, he typically prays for peace, he prays for his kids, and oftentimes he prays through the book of Psalms. He attributes his continual faith a lot to community, but he's got some other things that he shares that is actually encouraging to me as well. So, without any further ado, Zach Bolen and why he still believes. So it's crazy, like I have been thinking about this series, and I was just talking to the series being why are there people that still believe, and Priscilla and I were talking, because we've just changed so much in our faith, and we have gotten so frustrated with so much of the religious entanglements, but I want to personally move into a season where I'm more excited about my faith and community and a pursuit after Jesus and all that, and not and just move away from all the stuff that I'm frustrated with. And it's like, you hear people so often say things along the lines of, you gotta talk to people that aren't like you and really stretch yourself, and are you afraid of hearing other beliefs and all that stuff? And I 100% agree with that, but I have submerged myself in hearing other people, hearing the Dave Bazans of this world, who I love. I know him on a first name basis. Wish I could say we were tight, but the dude is just amazing. One of my favorite people. But I'm like, there's people that I know that I can talk to, close friends, guys like you that I'm getting to know, that I want to know what makes you different from another guy that maybe went to Mars Hill Church and led worship that's not a Christian anymore. Because there's, I'm sure, a lot of worship leaders that were in the same situation that you were in 10 years ago and same season of life, and now they're like, yeah, I do not believe. When you think about that personally, like, how would you process the question of just like, is there something special about Zach? Like, are you stronger in your faith than people who've lost their faith?
Absolutely not. I think, it's funny is because I remember, I don't know, like 12 years ago, a guy I really respect, he's a pastor now. He asked me, he's like, yeah, how are you doing in your walk with God? And I said, oh, well, my walk with God's great, but I have all this other stuff that's, bad. And he's like, wait a second. And it was, I had never really actually examined my own faith until he asked that question. He kind of called me out on my answer a little bit. And so it's kind of been one of those things where I think I've had to really just realize that, sorry, man.
just whether or not there's something special about you when it comes to your faith, and you're talking about your pastor and his
Yeah,
question.
yeah, absolutely nothing more special. And I think that's the thing that people, when you're younger, you look at someone older and you think, oh, I'll do that when they're older. When I'm
Yeah.
older, I'll do what they do. And then you get older and you don't, and then you get to the stage of life that, I remember seeing an uncle, getting up every morning reading his Bible and everything. And
Yeah.
it's like you just, I think the older you get, the more you live as a Christian, the more you see how much discipline I think it just requires, and a willingness to want to be in relationship with God,
Yeah.
regardless of what you believe theologically. It's like
Yeah.
everybody.
I mean, yeah. Do you know, like, do you have any close friends or maybe someone that you have admired from afar who doesn't believe anymore that used to?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely like certain people that I know that I think are. I'm not really sure where they're at anymore. I don't know that.
Yeah.
I don't know specifically that they would say they don't believe, but
Right.
I think they're pretty much in that world right now of kind of
Yeah.
feeling like they might not anymore.
So for someone who doesn't, in your mind, did they just give up? Did the enemy get a hold of them? I mean, what makes them different than you, or do you just choose not to bother with those sorts of thoughts?
No, I mean, I guess I just don't think you can be human without doubt. I think that's just kind of who we are. But then also, it seems like the large majority of friends that I've had or people I know that have drifted, it's mostly been because of either they were part of a church and that church just like things went really bad, or
Yeah.
they just kind of have disconnected a lot from any like semblance of Christian community, if you will.
Right.
And I think that's honestly a big deal because I mean that is, you said earlier, it's like you do want to submerge yourself and be around people that think differently from you. At the same time, too, there's value in being around other Christians too,
Right.
and that's not a bad thing.
Right.
And so I think a lot of the friends that I know that have drifted, it's been sort of like, well, Christian community just can't be trusted anymore, and so I just gotta get away from that. And the only genuine people I know anymore are people who aren't Christians. It seems to be the conversation I have.
Yeah.
I mean, the fault's on Christians too for that, if that's true.
Right.
But at the same time too, I'm also seeing like even people coming out of Mars Hill stuff. It's like there comes a certain point when you can only scapegoat and put things on people for so long before you have to start at least looking at yourself a little bit and saying, okay, what what is really my biggest holdup at this point,
Right.
And I think sometimes that's just a hard thing to want to do to yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Have you ever found yourself in a place since you were 14 where you were close to throwing in the towel, or maybe seasons of like immense doubt to where you're just like, gosh, this is scary?
Oh yeah, I mean, honestly, I don't even know that it was coincidental, but coming out of Mars Hill, there was a lot of. I mean, part of too. I mean, I'd worked at a couple bigger churches. I never really wanted to work in the church,
Yeah.
and I think I was just feeling the effects of, just sort of these business church models where you kind of that were sort of stripping away, for me, that were really eating at me, and realizing that okay, God called me into this, but then I was questioning that calling altogether because okay, now I don't want to do that anymore, and that's the place
Yeah.
I was at, and then I'm, looking around and seeing all these people that are hurting and just thinking like, God, where are you in all this? Is this just going to keep happening? Like, is Mars Hill just the first of all these big churches that are just going to start crumbling and everything? And so that was a big thing for me. It wasn't just the church, but then I think as well, anytime at least in my experience, I think big churches grow the way that they do because it's a very,
Dynamic, man.
yeah, there you go. It's the opposite. It's like conformity to the max.
Right.
And so I think you just get a bunch of people, thousands of people together that all think the same, and no one's really like pushing back on a ton of stuff except for the pastor. And that's like sort of the authority that pushes back on stuff. And then you step outside of that and you realize, oh my gosh, there are Christians that I respect that think differently than me on this subject and this subject. And that really affected me eventually for the good, but I went to a bad spot for a while where
Right.
I just started realizing, wow, people think so much differently than I do. And okay, wow, I've always believed this about this part of the Bible. I don't even think I believe it like that anymore. And then my initial reaction to that was it all must be something must be completely wrong with it all.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of common, it seems like, with a lot of people. But then you know, the more you, whatever place you're in, whatever you're doing that's helping you navigate through it all. For me, it was just
Yeah.
realizing that I just had hardly any faith in science in my blood at all. It was like I never really held the two. Um, they were always in contention. They were never
Right.
meant to be something that worked together. And so that was like a big thing. It was more of like an intellectual thing. But I've also had moments too when my dad died when I was 6. Gosh, I did not even want to believe there was a God. If there was a God, it was just, all right, well, if there's God, well then, and that's where my dad is. He's in heaven. So I guess I just need God to get me to heaven so I can see my dad. It wasn't ever like,
Right.
so I've definitely had those moments a lot where it's just, I struggle to really accept certain realities in this world. And I guess you kind of have a choice. Like, you're either going to explore it and figure out why, or you're just going to get really frustrated and angry and just say, I'm done.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so age 6, you're exploring or you're processing God and how he fits into my dad dying. I mean, you like, so it seems like at age 6, I mean, it's crazy because you're old enough to have advanced thoughts, but it just seems like maybe a 6-year-old can just concentrate on dealing with losing his father, but you're actually thinking too, like, well, what does God have to do with all this? Like, why would he do this? I mean,
Yeah.
that's crazy.
Yeah,
Gosh,
man.
were you a mad 6-year-old or just confused or
I was
what?
I was pretty quiet in a lot of ways. I didn't really know how to talk about it, and part of it was because no one really. I shouldn't say no one, but people. I mean, how do you talk to a kid who's just lost their
Yeah,
dad? It's pretty hard to really know what to talk to them about. And so I just kind of, I think in my own processing was in my head a lot. So I believed all kinds of things. I'd believe, okay, my dad, if God will get me, if, I can believe in God and that'll get me to my dad, or my dad didn't even die and God's just playing some crazy trick on me.
yeah,
And, or things like I'd be praying, like, God, just take me to heaven so I can be with my dad. I remember
right.
praying all of those things as, from 6 on.
Right. Right. So what keeps you hanging on? I mean, you said you went through some seasons in which you were like, "Wow, wait a second, Christians don't all believe in the same thing about major stuff." And what does that mean for all of us? I mean, here you are, I'll do some quick math, 18 years later and you're still believing. I mean, what is that thing that keeps you hanging on? And I think it looks different for a lot of people. I mean, what is it for you?
I think the biggest thing has just been the people that God surrounded me with.
Yeah.
Really gracious people that um, I don't think I've realized it as much until recently, actually. Like, different people along the way. Like, there's a guy who's a mentor. I'd consider him to be a mentor, but for a lot of years, an older guy, and he was just so gracious with me and all the things that I would share with him and struggle with. And then, now we're at this point. There was probably a point when he was mentoring me where we probably believed a lot of the same things. But I just had a
Yeah.
conversation with him, last week or 2 weeks ago, and I'm sharing with him different things, and it occurs to me like, man, we actually believe a lot of different things now, and this guy
Yeah.
still loves me and sees me as a brother. And
Yeah.
I think to me that's probably been the most humbling and grounding thing for me is seeing other Christians welcome me and invite me into friendship with them, even when I'm not all that great of a friend. God's shown me a lot through that, and not that that's necessarily been this perfect picture of who God is as a father or as a friend. But I think that's been part of it. And I think the other part too has just been a miracle of God's work, honestly, because I just think about, you know, I mean, my brother and I grew up in the same home, and we both took very different directions, man. And I'm not even sure why we did, except to say that, like, there was something in our personalities and something I think God was just doing. Not that he wasn't doing something with my brother, but just, I just think for whatever reason, I've always found myself, no matter how lost I get, still always there's just like this thing in me that says, I need God. I need to get back to him. I need your direction in this. And so, and that could just be from even a young boy, like crying out to God. I've always just, no matter how bad it gets, that's sort of like remains my last resort.
Right.
If you know what I mean.
Yeah, definitely. It's crazy because you either have to attribute what you just described to God, putting that in your heart to where you're constantly feeling like you need God, but you could also say, well, the path that Zach took and the experiences that he had and the things that he heard at an early age and his predisposition to believing in the supernatural and all these things added up to Zach's the kind of guy that just needs a God, that seeks after God. And I think it was Science Mike who said that basically the person that we are right now, it is possible for it to literally be a brain that's in a test tube that's got all sorts of things hooked up to it. Like we may not even be a person. And then he said something, I think in his book, that what we are right now is exactly on par as if you took a brain and you downloaded a bunch, like for you, 32 years worth of experiences and information. Like you are the result of everything that's been said to you, every thought that you've thought, everything that has happened. And obviously he's not ruling out the supernatural, but he's just saying that is how the brain works. But so it's either a supernatural thing or it's like a very scientific thing, because there's a lot of people. So your brother doesn't believe?
Mm-mm. No.
Now, do you ascribe to more of a Calvinist slant, or as far as predestination, or let's not even go there?
No, I mean, it's fine. You know, I think a lot of people, because I was at Mars Hill, just assumed a lot of things. And I definitely went there on some things for a while, but
you think women are inferior. Let's go down the list.
I can name for you the people that are going to hell. No. I think that I find myself, the more I go, just finding myself landing in the middle a lot more on a lot of things. And so, yeah, I mean, geez, sure, there are definitely, I guess I just think, you know, when you boil it down, you kind of get rid of all like the peripheral stuff. I think is that people making a big deal, but I think that if you're just focused on, for a moment, Jesus and the gift of God that is given to us in spirit because of Jesus' resurrection, and then also given the fact that we live in a culture that is extremely obsessed with the resurrection and not very much on the cross. Right. I think that's. I was reading this really great book not so long ago, where it just talks about how we focus, like our culture focuses so much on the resurrection, when in reality, Jesus is the only one who's actually experienced it. All we've done is tasted in it. And so, right. Jesus calls us, to die this daily death. And so, whether you want to look at it this or not, but he kind of says, the death that Jesus died for a few hours, we die every single day of our lives, and not necessarily in the physical sense, but in the spiritual sense. And so I think that when you get to that point, I think it really does have to come. It's a faith thing, it's like you're choosing to believe in a God you don't see, that regardless of what you believe about atonement or, wherever you are, it's kind of like that there is a, for me, it's like I'm putting faith in a God that loves me, that died that has resurrected from the grave and has invited me into a life um, free from sin and death. And so
Yeah.
when I say, when I say that, it's like that's not uncommon from most gospel message presentations you'd hear or whatever. But I think the thing is you are constantly making a decision to either believe that or not. And so I think, science or whatever it is isn't going to have an answer for that one. I don't.
Right. What's the chance, if you had to put a number on it, what's the chance that you think that you could possibly be wrong about your faith? Like that is just totally not based on anything.
I mean, anything's possible, I mean, and I definitely have thought that many times, like, all right, well, and I don't like the argument of, well, if it's all fake, at least I believed in,
Right,
at least I'm
right,
believing in this, and,
right,
I don't really like that.
right.
I think that I could easily say, oh, well, then, yeah, sure, it's possible it's all wrong. But then the thing that I cannot avoid is, like, if I'm looking at things right now, yes, it's easy to say, sure, maybe it's all like completely just we've been sold a big lie. But then I look back on the course of my life and I look at the stories that other people share and I just think, man, there's something significantly different in a lot of this stuff. And you see the way that when I look at God as like constantly redeeming so many things, I look at how he's done that in my life and I am incapable of saying that those things just happen by chance, and so that's just kind of the place that I'm in, where I look at that stuff as God working and not just some sort of me being the product of my environment and just some sort of natural chance that I'd wind up, in a different trajectory than someone else, depending on what I went through. Like I wholeheartedly believe that was God saving me and continuing to sustain me.
Yeah. What have there been any times in your life? I call them Chris Tucker moments where you're just like
Rush hour.
where,
Yeah, I love that. Okay.
where something happens and you're like, damn, that has to be God.
Oh
like,
gosh.
like, has there been times where you've experienced something, whether a dream or just a feeling, and you're like, I don't care what anybody says, can't prove it to anybody, but that right there, I just feel like has to be God, like
Yeah.
personally.
Yeah. I mean, a lot. It seems like a lot of it's been around death too. Like when my friend's, daughter died, I was at her memorial service, and I was like so pissed off about the whole thing. I mean, I was angry. I mean, honestly, that was one of the things that I was really struggling with for a long time, and really making me feel like, God,
How old is this girl?
she was 8.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I was really struggling. And then what was really humbling for me, and I just thought, these aren't crazy people. I know them. These are some of my closest friends. And I see them broken, suffering, but praising God that she was free of her suffering.
Yeah.
Praising God and thanking him that they could be with her again one day, that she wouldn't have to live, that this was the only suffering she'd have to experience, that she wouldn't have to live another 80 years and experience more. That was just like, I don't think you get a perspective like that taken. I mean, I've heard people on crazy pills, but those weren't two crazy people at the literally standing in front of the casket of their daughter. Their dead daughter's 3 feet from them. They're not crazy. And so that definitely, like, I will always remember that moment as like, whoa, that's only God could give somebody a disposition like that in the midst of an unimaginable tragedy.
Right.
And it's not like, it's like they literally endured an entire year of watching their daughter suffer. It wasn't like they woke up one day and our daughter died. It was like, no, they endured a year of it, and they spent 6 months of that time knowing she was going to die. And then they get to the end and they say, gosh, this is the worst thing I've ever had to go through. But God's healed her ultimately. Like, she's She's not suffering anymore. He's redeemed this situation by, giving her something better than what she's been experiencing for the past year. And so that's definitely, a specific moment that always stands out to me.
Yeah. Yeah. So it sounds like you're definitely at a place now to where, not only, so when it comes to the actual Christian faith, so when we say the word God, we're talking from a Christian perspective. I mean, you're at a place where you're just like, yeah, I guess there has to be a chance that it's not true, but Zach Bolen is 100% convinced in his mind that, give or take some obvious theological blunders that are in your head right now, what you believe in is true. Like there is a real relationship that you're in with God, and you're 100% convinced.
100%. Yeah. And I don't doubt that. And that's the thing too, is even in the times when I've been doubting and I've doubted, at least this has been the case for me. The majority of the times I've been heavy in doubt, it's actually always been more around the Bible or around something somebody told me that I discovered later was like completely not true. And so I've yet to come to a place where I have any reason to believe that God is not actively working and doing stuff even right now.
Yeah. It's crazy because the last question I was going to ask you is if you could get God to actually show himself to you in like an undeniable way, like basically Jesus in his radiance walking in and saying, feel the scars, put your finger, like, would you choose that? Because I think some people are like, no, there's something sacred about having faith in the unseen. But I personally, in a heartbeat, would say, yes, sign me up for that, because I do struggle with a lot of doubt. And, for me, faith is like a continual perseverance. I can't stop believing. There's just that thing, those times where I feel like God's presence is just so real. But my Lord, I would choose that in a heartbeat if God could reveal himself. And I could make an argument that he already has, but I'm talking like parting the Red Sea sort of stuff, I mean, would you choose that? Would you say yes to that? I mean, it seems like you don't need that because you're good, you know what I'm saying?
Dude, I would absolutely say yes to that. I mean, I think the main thing too is that, why? I don't know. I don't know why you wouldn't,
Right, it'd be cool, right?
I feel like I'm praying all the time for God to like tangibly, for whatever he's doing, for it to somehow be tangible, so we're not having a second guess, but like, whatever it is. And so because I've always like personally struggled with, one of them was unfortunately a pastor I followed for a couple years, but with sort of the audible voice of God thing, because I'm not saying it doesn't happen. I just personally am like, all right, it just so happens that the couple people I know that have really had those encounters wound up maybe getting a little bit sideways. So I think that like there's like that side of it too, where people try and kind of create these moments that may or may not be real. But that being said, not taking any of that away from them necessarily, if God were to appear to me, I would imagine that would be an insane thing to tell people about.
Right, totally. If people would be like, well, Zach done lost his mind.
Dude, because when you really think about it, Jesus is with people 40 days walking around, and there were still thousands of people who didn't believe.
Yeah, totally.
And Christians were being persecuted still, even with Jesus no longer in a grave. I think that just is like, to me, such a amazing, just, because even if I saw it, would I still believe it?
Right. Yeah, totally.
Because people did.
That's true. Yeah, you do. I had to have hallucinated. Totally. Yeah, it's that's a crazy thought. Yeah, I would choose it in a heartbeat too. Like I've heard stories, and I'm always extremely skeptical of it. But the whole man, I died. I saw Jesus. He said that he's not done with me yet and that there's more work to do. Or I've heard the stories of he gave me a choice.
Yeah.
I could stay here or I could go back, but I had to be there with my mom and stuff. It's just like, man, if that's possible, I want to die and I will come back. Okay?
Yeah, come on. Give me a little couple seconds here. Dude, I know, man.
Well, Zach, it's been fun, man. I actually I enjoy this sort of thing because it definitely bolsters my faith. So I appreciate it.
That's cool, man. I appreciate the conversation, Joey.
Yeah, man. Appreciate it, brother. We'll see you.
All right, see you, man.